Naomi Prescott stood at the window, watching the raindrops dripping down the glass. Outside the window, the suburbs of Toledo, Ohio, looked bleak in the gray of October rain. Her and Dexter's house on Maple Street didn't stand out among the other neat two-story houses with small, manicured lawns. It was the kind of house Naomi had chosen 7 years ago when they decided to move out of their downtown apartment. Dexter wanted something more distinctive, maybe an old Victorian house they could renovate, but Naomi insisted on practicality. This neighborhood has stable real estate prices, good schools, and convenient transportation, she'd said then, and Dexter, as usual, had agreed. Naomi fixed her perfectly styled brown hair and looked at her watch, 6:30 in the evening. Dexter was due back from work at 7. She still had time to get everything ready for dinner. She pulled the marinated chicken she'd made in the morning out of the refrigerator. Dexter preferred beef, but Naomi thought they both needed to watch their cholesterol. "You don't want to end up like your father with a bypass at 56, do you?" she said. And Dexter again agreed. At 38, Naomi was a mid-level manager at Midwest Insurance. She was proud of her work and how she had methodically climbed the career ladder over the past 12 years. Her team respected her for her efficiency and organization, though some whispered that she could be overly demanding. "I just expect the same level of responsibility from people that I demonstrate myself," she explained at a recent corporate training session. Dexter, her husband of 9 years, worked as an electrical engineer for the city's utility company. He was a calm, reliable man who preferred to go with the flow and avoid conflict. His job was stable, though not particularly lucrative, but Naomi appreciated that stability. When they'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party, she'd been drawn to Dexter's predictability, the lack of drama that had accompanied her previous relationships. Naomi set the plates on the table, the white china with the thin blue border they'd gotten as a wedding present. She folded the napkins into triangles, as she'd learned in a master class on serving. Dexter had once joked that they didn't need such formalities at home, but Naomi had insisted that little things create a family culture. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her musings. Dexter walked in, shaking raindrops off his navy blue raincoat. "You're early," Naomi remarked, kissing his cheek. "The crew finished with the transformer replacement on Westbrook Avenue faster than we expected," Dexter explained, hanging up his jacket. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken with rosemary and lemon, quinoa with vegetables," Naomi replied, heading back into the kitchen. Dexter followed her, pouring himself a glass of water. "Quinoa again? I thought we ate it on Monday." "It's healthy, and we have plenty left over from our last purchase," Naomi cut off in a tone that tolerated no objection. "By the way, don't forget we're going to my sister's birthday party on Saturday. I bought her that ceramic vase we saw at the craft house. I thought we were going to the soccer game on Saturday. Rick got the tickets, remember?" Dexter leaned against the kitchen island, watching his wife check the chicken in the oven. Naomi straightened, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "You can't seriously expect us to skip Laura's birthday for a soccer game. Her 40th birthday, Dex. I talked about it a month ago. But I promised Rick. He had a hard time getting those tickets." "Then you'll have to apologize to him. Family obligations are more important than soccer." Naomi went back to making the sauce, deeming the conversation finished. Dexter sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He knew it was useless to argue. In their marriage, Naomi made the decisions, and he agreed. It had always been that way, from choosing a house to planning vacations to allocating finances. Naomi ran the family budget, kept track of investments, and determined where they would go on the weekends. Dexter sometimes joked with friends that he didn't even have to think about what to wear because his wife had already organized his clothes in the closet by day of the week. Dinner passed in relative silence. Dexter talked about the power problem on the east side of town they'd dealt with today, but Naomi seemed immersed in her own thoughts. "How was your presentation?" Dexter asked, remembering that his wife was preparing to present a quarterly report to management in the morning. "Fine," Naomi replied succinctly, although Finley tried to appropriate some of my ideas again. "Finley? Is that the new guy in the analytics department?" "Yeah, transferred to us 3 months ago from the Boston office. Thinks he's an expert on everything," Naomi grumbled. But I quickly put him in his place by pointing out the errors in his calculations in front of the entire management team. Dexter raised his eyebrows. "That sounds harsh." "This is business, Dex. If you don't defend your turf, you get eaten." Naomi sipped wine from her glass. "By the way, did you remember we're invited to a company dinner next Friday? We'll have to get you a new tie. That blue one of yours is all faded." Dexter nodded without arguing. Naomi always carefully selected their closet for such events, taking care to make sure they looked appropriate. After dinner, Naomi put the dishes away while Dexter loaded the dishwasher. It was one of the few household chores he did without reminders. Naomi had insisted on a clear division of household chores early in their marriage, making a detailed schedule on a magnetic board on the refrigerator. Dexter joked that it felt like work, but he secretly appreciated the organization. It saved him from having to make decisions. "I have an important client meeting tomorrow," Naomi said as she brewed her herbal tea before bed. "I might be running late." "No problem," Dexter replied. "I can heat up the leftovers from tonight's dinner." "I'll leave you the frozen soup. It's healthier," Naomi set a cup in front of him. "And don't forget to check the mail. The bill for the house insurance should be coming. Pay it right away, please." "Okay." Dexter sipped the tea Naomi brewed every night, claiming it helped him sleep better. He preferred beer, but he'd long ago stopped arguing over such trivialities. In the evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Naomi looked through her day planner, planning the next day. Dexter lay beside her, leafing through the technical manual for the new power distribution system the city was installing. On Naomi's nightstand were perfectly arranged bottles of night care creams. She followed a strict routine she never missed. "Did you make the dentist appointment like I asked?" she asked, without taking a break from her daily planner. Dexter mewed. "I forgot. I'll call you tomorrow." Naomi sighed. "I already signed you up for next Wednesday at 4. Make that time free." "But we have a routine substation inspection on Wednesday." "Tell me you have a doctor's appointment." "Health is more important," Naomi cut her off. Dexter sighed again and went back to his manual. He knew arguing with Naomi was like banging his head against a wall. She'd always been organized, determined, but lately her control over every aspect of their lives had become increasingly stifling. He remembered the times when they could spontaneously decide to go to the lake for the weekend or stay up until the morning at a friend's party. Now everything was regimented, planned, fixed on Naomi's calendar. Deep down, Dexter knew that this organization was Naomi's shield. Her childhood with a single mother who barely made ends meet had taught her to always be one step ahead, to control every detail to avoid unforeseen situations. He understood that and accepted her for who she was. But sometimes, lying next to her in the dark, he wondered, was he really happy? And was there room for real intimacy in their relationship when everything was so planned and predictable? Naomi turned off the light, wished him good night with a dry kiss on the cheek, and turned to her side of the bed. Dexter stared up at the ceiling, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. Something has to change, he thought. But as usual, he didn't know where to start. The next morning, Naomi got up at 6 a.m. sharp, as she did every weekday. She did her usual set of exercises, showered and dressed in her prearranged outfit, a navy blue suit with a white blouse. Dexter awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of the coffee machine running. As always, Naomi had left him a to-do list for the day on his desk and a reminder to pay his insurance bill. "Don't forget to drop off my pants at the dry cleaners," she said, finishing her coffee. "And call about the leak in the garage." "Sure thing," Dexter mumbled sleepily, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Naomi went over to kiss him goodbye, but her phone rang. She answered it quickly, already switching to work mode. "Yes, Jen, I'm on my way out. Get all the materials ready for the meeting." She left without saying goodbye, leaving Dexter alone in the kitchen. He looked at the to-do list and felt a familiar heaviness. His life had turned into running Naomi's errands, and he knew he was to blame. He'd let it happen, ceding control of his life step by step, agreeing to all the terms because it was easier. He was 39 years old, but sometimes he felt much older, as if life was passing him by as he floated on the current Naomi had created. He'd been thinking more and more lately. What if he'd started making his own decisions? What would Naomi say? And most importantly, would he have the courage to disrupt this carefully constructed order? After completing most of the tasks on Naomi's list, Dexter stopped by the gym on his way home from work. It was one of the few places he felt free from his wife's constant supervision. Naomi approved of his workouts. "Keeping healthy is important for long-term insurance planning," she said, but she preferred home workouts herself. At the gym, he met Mark, his longtime buddy with whom they had started training together 5 years ago. Mark was divorced and often joked that Dexter was living his dream with such an organized wife. "Dude, you seem distracted today," Mark remarked as he helped Dexter with a bench press. "Problems at home?" Dexter set the barbell down and sat up, wiping the sweat from his face with a towel. "No, just the usual." "That's the problem, huh?" Mark grinned. "When things are too predictable." "It's not that," Dexter started, but stammered, realizing his friend was probably right. "It's just that sometimes it feels like we're living out Naomi's script, you know. Every day is scheduled, every decision predetermined. Have you ever tried to, I don't know, take something spontaneous, break the pattern?" Dexter shook his head. "With Naomi, she'd find that irresponsible." "That's why I'm a free man now," Mark patted his friend on the shoulder. "Just kidding, of course. But seriously, maybe it's worth a shot. What's the worst that could happen? She'll put your spontaneous act in her diary retroactively." They both laughed, but Mark's words made Dexter think. Really, what was the worst thing that could happen? Divorce? But was his current life what he wanted for himself? On the way home, Dexter stopped at a liquor store and bought a bottle of expensive red wine, a spontaneous gesture that he hoped might diversify their evening a bit. Naomi preferred to plan her alcohol purchases in advance, choosing wines based on reviews and ratings. When he got home, Naomi was already preparing dinner, baked fish and vegetables. Tuesday was fish day on her menu. "I bought wine," Dexter said, taking a bottle out of the bag. "Thought it would be nice to drink tonight." Naomi looked at the label with slight disapproval. "Merlot? We usually drink it with meat, not fish." "I know, but the salesman recommended this particular one, said it was special." Naomi shrugged. "Okay, but you better consult me next time. I'm just putting together a wine list for the November dinners." And there it was again. A small act of independence was met with condescending acceptance, as if he were a child who'd done something cute but not quite right. Dexter opened the bottle and poured 2 glasses, trying not to show his disappointment. Over dinner, Naomi talked about the problems with the new software in the office and how she'd come up with a solution that had delighted her superiors. Dexter listened, nodding in all the right places, as he'd done hundreds of times before. "And how was your day?" Naomi asked, finishing her story. "The usual," Dexter replied. "True, an interesting power situation arose in an industrial area. We found an unusual solution." "Does it have to do with that project for City Hall you mentioned last week?" Naomi interrupted him. "No, that's different." "Speaking of City Hall," she interrupted again, "I heard they're going to be cutting the budget for utilities. Aren't you worried about your position?" It was a typical conversation. Naomi guided its flow, choosing topics she thought were important, often interrupting Dexter if he was talking about something she wasn't particularly interested in. He hadn't noticed it so acutely before, but today her every word, every gesture of control seemed especially overt. After dinner, Dexter suggested they watch a movie his colleague had recommended, but Naomi reminded him that they had to fill out tax paperwork tonight. "If we do it now, we won't have to worry about it before the deadline," she said, already pulling out a folder of paperwork. Dexter sat next to her at the table, signing the paperwork where she indicated, and thought about how even their taxes had become part of her system of control. At the beginning of their relationship, he'd admired her organization. She'd been an anchor he could hold on to in the choppy sea of life, but now that anchor seemed to be pulling him to the bottom. At night, lying awake, Dexter pondered Mark's words. Maybe he should try to make a change. Not just buy the wrong wine or suggest a movie, but do something really meaningful, something that would show Naomi that he was still capable of making his own decisions. Next to him, Naomi slept the peaceful sleep of someone who was sure everything was going according to plan. Dexter stared at her profile in the darkness and wondered if he still loved her the way he used to, or if he was just used to living by her rules. And if he decided to change those rules, would there be anything left of their marriage? With these troubled thoughts, he finally fell asleep, not realizing that he would soon have the opportunity to put his theories to the test. On Friday night, Naomi stayed at work longer than usual. Dexter sat in the living room, changing channels on the television without much interest. The clock on the wall read almost 8 when he heard the sound of the front door opening. Naomi entered, tossing her bag on the hallway nightstand, an uncharacteristically careless gesture for her. Her usually immaculate hair looked a little disheveled, and her face was tired. "Rough day?" Dexter asked, turning off the television. "Not a word," she sighed, kicking off her shoes. "This project with Hamilton Industries is going to drive me crazy. Corporate clients are always the most demanding." Dexter got up and went into the kitchen. "I'll heat up dinner for you. I made pasta." "Pasta?" A touch of irritation could be heard in Naomi's voice. "I thought we agreed to cut back on carbs." "It's whole grain pasta," Dexter excused himself, "and I made a light sauce." Naomi shook her head, but didn't pursue the subject further. She walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of red wine, taking a big sip before she spoke again. "By the way, I was going to say," she began in a deliberately careless tone, sipping more wine. "I'll probably be late Tuesday night, meeting with Finley after work to discuss strategy on the project." Dexter, who was standing with his back to her at the microwave, froze for a second. "Finley? Is that the guy who tried to steal your ideas?" "Yeah." Naomi leaned against the kitchen island, twirling her glass in her hands. "But he's good with numbers, and we need to iron out some details. Decided to meet at the Olive Garden for dinner and some work at the same time." There was something in her tone, the deliberate carelessness with which she said it, as if testing Dexter's reaction. 9 years of marriage had taught him to pick up on those nuances. The microwave beeped, but Dexter paid no attention to it. "So you're going to dinner with a male co-worker?" he asked, turning to his wife. Naomi shrugged, still as nonchalantly. "It's a work meeting, Dex. Does it really bother you? It would be natural to feel a pang of jealousy, to make a scene, to demand an explanation." That, Dexter realized, was exactly what she'd been expecting. His predictable reaction, one she could control, directed by a familiar script. Instead, he nodded slowly and said in a calm voice, "Of course not. In fact, I was thinking of meeting Rachel from the gym myself. She offered to help me with my workout program." Naomi froze with her glass to her lips. "Rachel?" "Rachel Harper, the fitness instructor. You saw her when you picked me up last Thursday, the blonde who led the group workout." Dexter pulled a plate out of the microwave and set it on the table, surprised at his own calmness. "Since you're busy on Tuesday, maybe I'll give her a call." For a moment, something resembling uncertainty flashed in Naomi's eyes. "You're already socializing with her outside the gym?" "We exchanged numbers after she helped me with my deadlift technique," Dexter replied, trying to make it sound like something completely casual. "She said she could put together a customized program for me." Naomi slowly set her glass down on the countertop. "And you think that's a good idea? Personal training sessions usually cost a lot." "She offered a discount," Dexter lied, surprised himself at how easy it came out. "And you always say that investing in your health pays off." Naomi looked at him carefully, as if trying to figure out what was going on behind his outward calm. Dexter held her gaze as he continued to busy himself with serving dinner. "Of course," she finally said, but her voice didn't sound as confident anymore. "If you think it's worth the money." "I think it's worth a try," Dexter said, sitting down at the table. "Will you have dinner?" Naomi sat down across from him, and Dexter noticed her furtively studying his face. He did his best to look casual, hiding his surprise at his own bravery. He'd never confronted Naomi like this before, and there was something oddly satisfying about the way she was trying to figure out what he was up to. Dinner passed in tense silence. Naomi asked about his day, about work, about his weekend plans, but Dexter felt her questions were just an attempt to regain his usual control of the conversation. He answered calmly, not giving her any reason to think anything had changed, but inside he felt a strange excitement as if he'd discovered a new game. After dinner, Naomi left to take a shower, and Dexter stayed in the kitchen putting away the dishes. He heard her talking on the phone in the bathroom quietly, almost in a whisper. When she returned, her face was impenetrable. "So, about Tuesday," she said, sitting down next to him on the couch where he was watching TV. "I think we should discuss ahead of time who will pick up the car. I can take a cab to the restaurant and you can take ours." "Or I could take a cab," Dexter offered, "if the gym is closer to home." Naomi nodded, but Dexter noticed her shoulders tense. "Okay, just don't stay out too late. We have a meeting with the financial advisor on Wednesday morning, remember?" "Of course I remember," Dexter said, though in truth he'd completely forgotten about it. "I'll be home by 11. "By 11? Naomi raised her eyebrows. "Your workouts don't usually last that long." "We might have dinner afterward," Dexter said, watching her reaction. "Rachel mentioned a new healthy food place that opened up near the gym." Naomi was quiet for a moment, as if mulling over her answer. "Of course," she finally said. "Just don't eat too many carbs before bed. You know how it affects your sleep." Dexter nodded, holding back a smile. Even now, when something was clearly disrupting her plans, Naomi tried to keep control of the situation by giving him advice and reminding him of the regimen. The weekend passed in a strange atmosphere. Naomi was unusually quiet, checking her phone frequently and going into another room to talk a few times. Dexter pretended not to notice it, but a strange feeling was growing inside him, a mixture of anxiety and excitement. He didn't know if Naomi was really going to meet with Finley or if this was just a test of his reaction, but now they were both caught up in some new dynamic. Monday morning, as Naomi was getting ready for work, she suddenly said, "I was thinking about your meeting with Rachel tomorrow. Maybe I should call Finley and reschedule our meeting. After all, we can discuss the project at the office as well." Dexter, who was pouring himself a cup of coffee, shrugged with feigned nonchalance. "No need to change your plans because of me. My meeting isn't that important. I can reschedule it if you want me home." No, Naomi said quickly. "I told you, it's just a work meeting. I just thought maybe we should have dinner together." "We can have dinner together on Wednesday," Dexter said, "or any other day. It's just one night, after all." Naomi nodded, but Dexter noticed the way she bit her lip, a gesture that appeared when she was annoyed or concerned. "Of course. I'll see you tonight then." After she left, Dexter sat at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of the situation. He hadn't planned this confrontation, but now that it had started, he couldn't back down. It wasn't about jealousy. He really didn't believe Naomi could cheat on him with some coworker. It was about the control she'd always had over their lives, over him. And now that he was defying that control for the first time in years, he could see her worrying, trying to get things back on track. At lunchtime, he actually called Rachel from the gym. They barely knew each other. She'd actually helped him with his weightlifting technique a couple weeks ago and had given him her number in passing in case there were any questions about training. He hadn't planned on calling her, but now he had an excuse. "Rachel, this is Dexter Campbell from the Fit Zone gym." "Dexter? Ah, yes, I remember you." Rachel's voice sounded a little puzzled. "What can I do for you?" "I'm calling about that personal training program you suggested," he said, hoping she'd play along. "Do you have time tomorrow night?" "Tomorrow?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Actually, I have class until 8, but I'm free after that." "8 is perfect. Maybe we could discuss the program over dinner? I hear there's a new place opening up near the gym." There was a pause. Dexter, I hope you realize that I'm offering strictly professional services." "Of course," he said quickly. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. Professional counseling. Just thought it would be more comfortable to discuss the program over dinner than in a noisy room." Another pause. "Okay," Rachel finally said, though there was still wariness in her voice. "But I can't stay out late." "Of course. Thank you, Rachel. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Hanging up the phone, Dexter felt a mixture of relief and guilt. He hadn't wanted to give Rachel false hopes or use her in his game with Naomi. But now he really had plans for Tuesday, and he couldn't back out. That evening, as he and Naomi ate dinner, she brought up the topic of the upcoming evening again. "So what do you want out of this workout program?" she asked, setting herself a salad. "You never mentioned before that you wanted to work out with a personal trainer." "I just thought it was time to take my workouts to the next level," Dexter replied. "Rachel specializes in strength training for people my age. She says proper technique is especially important at our age." "And how much will that cost?" "We'll discuss that tomorrow," Dexter said. "But she mentioned a discount for regular customers of the gym." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "And how often do you plan to work out with her?" "I don't know yet. I need to figure out if her methodology is right for me first." Naomi nodded, but he could see she wasn't convinced. "What about your meeting with Finley?" he asked, changing the subject. "What project are you discussing?" "Oh, it's a new risk assessment system for corporate clients," Naomi replied, clearly pleased with the change of subject. "Finley worked on a similar project in Boston and thinks his experience might be useful. Between you and me, though, I don't think his approach would work in our region." "Then why meet with him?" Naomi shrugged. "Office politics. He's Stephen's new favorite. Better to listen to his ideas and diplomatically dismiss them than to refuse to cooperate directly." Dexter nodded, pretending to be fully absorbed in her explanation, though doubt gnawed at him inside. Was this meeting with Finley real, or was Naomi just creating an alibi for something else? And did he have the right to suspect her when he was improvising on the fly himself? When they went to bed, Naomi was going through her day planner as usual, but Dexter noticed that she cast several studying glances at him. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No," she replied a little too quickly. "Just thinking about tomorrow. Lots of meetings." "Good luck with them," Dexter said, turning on his side. "And with Finley, too." He felt her tense beside him, but she didn't say anything. Turning off the lights, they lay in the dark, each immersed in their own thoughts, and it was as if an unspoken tension hung between them, the beginning of a game whose rules they didn't yet fully understand. Tuesday began as usual. Naomi got up at 6, did her morning workout, made breakfast. But Dexter noticed that she checked her phone more often than usual and changed her outfit twice before going out, a typical behavior for a woman who usually planned her closet a week in advance. "You're leaving early today," Dexter remarked, when Naomi was already packing her bag at 7:30 instead of her usual 8. "Lots to do before the evening meeting," she replied without looking him in the eye. "How about you? What time do you plan to leave for practice?" "I'm stopping by the house right after work to change, then the gym," Dexter said, sipping his coffee. "I'm meeting Rachel at 8. Naomi nodded, pursing her lips. "Don't forget your house keys. I might be back late." "Sure," Dexter replied, watching her primp in front of the hallway mirror, another unusual gesture. Naomi usually only checked her appearance once before leaving the bedroom. When the door closed behind her, Dexter felt a strange mixture of anxiety and excitement. Something had changed between them, and he didn't yet understand where it would lead, but it was too late to back out. At work, the day stretched unusually slowly. Dexter caught himself checking the time every 15 minutes. Several times he picked up his phone to text Naomi the usual message about buying groceries or paying a bill, but each time he stopped himself. Today was not a day for routine. At lunchtime, Dexter unexpectedly stopped by the barber shop next to the office. Naomi usually made an appointment for him to see her stylist every 6 weeks, strictly controlling his appearance. But today, he decided to do something different. "Something a little more modern," he said to the young barber with the tattoos, "and perhaps trim the beard." When Dexter looked in the mirror 40 minutes later, he barely recognized himself. His usual conservative haircut had given way to a more stylish one, with shaved temples and a longer top. The beard that Naomi had made him trim very short, its more professional Dex, was now neatly styled in a more modern style. "The wife won't recognize it," the barber joked. And Dexter smiled nervously, thinking how prophetic those words might be. Back at work, he caught a few surprised looks from his co-workers. Martha from accounting even whistled, "Wow, Dexter, you look completely different." It was a strange but pleasant feeling to attract attention, to be noticed. Over the course of the day, Dexter caught himself standing straighter, speaking more confidently. It was as if the new haircut had given him a piece of his new identity. After work, he stopped by the mall and bought a new shirt, a dark blue, tight-fitting shirt, not at all like the loose, conservative models Naomi usually picked out for him. In the fitting room, he was surprised to find that regular workouts at the gym had done their job. The shirt fit perfectly, emphasizing his shoulders and chest. At the checkout counter, he'd bought a new cologne, too, one that was more tart and distinctive than the one Naomi bought him every Christmas. At home, Dexter showered and dressed in a new shirt and his best jeans. For a moment, he was overcome with guilt. He really was going to meet another woman, even if it was just the trainer from the gym. But he quickly reminded himself that Naomi had started this game herself with her careless mention of dinner with Finley. Before leaving, Dexter looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man who stared back at him. This wasn't the obedient, predictable husband he'd been for the past 9 years. This was a man with a will of his own, with plans his wife didn't know about. And most surprisingly, he liked this new feeling. On the way to the gym, his phone vibrated. A message from Naomi. "Have you left yet? Remind me when you plan on coming back." Normally, Dexter would have answered right away, detailing his plans. But today, he just put the phone back in his pocket. Let him worry a little. Let him feel what it was like not to know, not to be in control. Rachel was waiting for him at the entrance to the gym, dressed in simple black leggings and a loose gray tank top. Her blonde hair was gathered into a high ponytail and her face was barely touched with makeup, a stark contrast to Naomi's impeccably dressed and make-upped face. "Wow, didn't recognize you," Rachel said as she looked him over. "New haircut?" Yeah, decided to try something new, Dexter replied, feeling oddly awkward. Now that he was standing in front of her, his plan seemed silly and childish. Look, about dinner. If you've changed your mind, I understand. That's okay, Rachel smiled. I can really help with the exercise program, but why don't we work out first and then have dinner? I want to watch you do the basic exercises so I can get a better idea of what to work with. Dexter spent the next hour in the gym doing exercises under Rachel's guidance. She was a professional but friendly instructor, correcting his technique and explaining the principles of proper loading. It didn't feel at all like a date, and Dexter felt both relieved and strangely disappointed. After their workout, they went to a nearby cafe, a small place with organic food and smoothies that Naomi would probably like. Sitting across from Rachel, listening to her talk about proper nutrition and workout schedules, Dexter caught himself thinking that for the first time in a long time, he was spending an evening with a woman who wasn't telling him what to do. "Do you have any specific goals?" Rachel asked, sipping her protein smoothie. "Weight loss, muscle building, endurance?" "Honestly, I just want to feel more alive," Dexter replied, surprised at his own candor. "The last few years, it's like I've been stuck in a rut." Rachel nodded understandingly. "Many of my clients come in with exactly that motivation. Physical changes often trigger other life changes as well." They talked for almost 2 hours. Rachel talked about her journey into the fitness industry, how she quit her office job and retrained as a trainer after 30, how she was afraid to start from scratch but never regretted her decision. Her story made Dexter think about his own life, about the choices he'd made or, more accurately, allowed to be made for himself. At 10:30, as they were about to leave, Dexter checked his phone and found 3 missed calls from Naomi and 5 messages, each more insistent than the last. "Something important?" Rachel asked, noticing his tense expression. "My wife is worried," he replied, quickly typing back, "It's okay, I'll be right there." "Oh, I didn't know you were married," Rachel said, and a slight disappointment flashed in her voice. "You're not wearing a ring." Dexter looked at his hand. Indeed, he'd forgotten to put on his wedding ring after his shower, for the first time in 9 years of marriage. It was so uncharacteristic of him that he hadn't even noticed its absence. "I usually wear it," he muttered. "Forgot today." They said goodbye outside the cafe. Rachel gave him a printed workout program and promised to check on his progress in 2 weeks. It was a purely professional meeting, but as Dexter got into the cab, he felt a strange thrill, as if he'd actually done something forbidden. At home, Naomi was waiting for him. She was sitting on the living room couch, dressed in an elegant black dress, with a glass of wine in her hand and a tense expression on her face. When Dexter walked in, she slowly looked up and froze when she saw his new haircut and clothes. What did you do to your hair?" she asked, and her voice sounded unaccustomedly confused. "Decided to update the look," Dexter replied, walking into the room. "And how did your meeting with Finley go?" Naomi took a large sip of wine before answering. "Fine. We discussed the project, had dinner, nothing special." "And that's why you wore your best dress?" Dexter asked, nodding at her outfit that she usually saved for important corporate events. "Yeah, it was a business event at a decent restaurant," Naomi replied, but her usual confidence wavered. "And I see you've also prepared for your workout." "Rachel gave me a great program," Dexter said, pulling the folded sheets out of his pocket. "She thinks that, with my physique, I can make serious gains in a couple months." "And that's why you talked until 11? "We had dinner after practice, discussing the details of the program," Dexter replied, trying to sound casual. "She's very professional. And of course, very attractive," Naomi murmured. "Didn't notice," Dexter lied. "We were only discussing training." Naomi set her glass down on the table and crossed her arms over her chest. And since when have you been so concerned about your appearance? New haircut, new clothes. What's next? A sports car? Just decided it was time for a change, Dexter said, heading for the kitchen. Don't you want me to look better? You already look good. Looked good, Naomi corrected herself, following him. I liked your old haircut. It was more professional. And I like the new one, Dexter replied calmly, pouring himself some water. By the way, I'm going to the gym again tomorrow. Rachel said I need to work out at least 3 times a week to get results. Tomorrow? Naomi frowned. But we're scheduled to have dinner with the Brauns. I told you about it a week ago. Really? Dexter feigned thoughtfulness. I don't remember such a thing. Anyway, I've already made arrangements with Rachel. It was an outright lie. Rachel hadn't said anything about tomorrow, but Dexter wanted to see how far he could get before Naomi tried to regain control. Dexter, Naomi stepped closer, and he caught the scent of her expensive perfume. What's going on? You haven't been like yourself the last few days. I don't know what you mean, he replied, taking a step back. I just decided to take care of myself. Weren't you the one who always said I needed to watch my health more? Yeah, but Naomi faltered, clearly not knowing how to respond to this new version of her usually obedient husband. Look, let's just sit down and discuss this quietly. Maybe we're both a little tired and need a vacation. Maybe we should plan a mini vacation this weekend. Let's go to that spa hotel you liked last year. Dexter recognized this tactic. Naomi was trying to get the conversation back on track, to take over the role of organizer of their lives again. But this time he wasn't going to give in. Sounds good, but I'm not sure I can do it, he said. I need to consult with Rachel about a training schedule, but you go if you want. You don't have to wait for me. Naomi's face reflected such genuine surprise that Dexter almost laughed. Never before had he turned down her plans or suggestions. Never had he ever suggested she do something without him. You want me to go alone? She asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. Why not? You deserve a vacation. Dexter finished his water and set the glass in the sink. I'm going to take a shower. I have to get up early tomorrow. He left Naomi in the kitchen, still trying to comprehend what had happened. As he left, he felt a strange satisfaction. For the first time in a long time, he was the one in control, the one making the decisions. And strangely, he liked it. Over the next few days, Dexter continued this game. He bought a few more new shirts, started using his own cologne instead of the one Naomi chose, and spent more time at the gym. He didn't meet with Rachel one-on-one anymore, but he specifically mentioned her name in conversations, giving Naomi the impression that there was more between them than a trainer-client relationship. Naomi reacted to these changes with increasing anxiety. She started spending more time at home, canceled a few work meetings, and even offered to join him at the gym, an idea Dexter politely but firmly declined. That's my personal time, he said. Besides, you have your own workout schedule. Friday night, as Dexter was getting ready for the gym, Naomi finally couldn't stand it. What's going on, Dex? She asked, standing in the bedroom doorway while he changed his clothes. You're avoiding me, changing your appearance, abandoning our plans. Is this about Rachel? Do you have something? Dexter slowly buttoned his shirt, mulling over his answer. Part of him wanted to admit that this was all just a game, a test to see how she would react. But the other part, the part that was enjoying his newfound freedom, wanted to continue. No, he finally answered. There's nothing between me and Rachel. I'm just changing. Is that a bad thing? Not if you're changing for yourself, Naomi said, and there was an unexpected sincerity in her voice. But I think you're doing it to spite me. Ever since I mentioned dinner with Finley, it's like you've been trying to punish me. Dexter stiffened. Naomi was perceptive. It had always been one of her strengths. Maybe, he admitted. But didn't you do the same thing? Didn't check to see how I'd react? Naomi lowered her eyes. "I didn't have dinner with Finley on Tuesday," she said quietly. "I canceled the meeting. Just sat at the restaurant by myself, then went to my sister's." That admission caught Dexter off guard. "Then why did you have to go to all this trouble?" "I don't know," Naomi shook her head. "Maybe I wanted to see if you didn't care. We've been together so long, things have gotten so predictable. Sometimes I feel like you're just going with the flow, with no emotion." Dexter walked over to her and really looked at his wife for the first time in a long time. He saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before: insecurity, fear of loss, perhaps even a love that years of habit and control had buried beneath the layers of everyday worries. "I have emotions," he said. "Just learn to hide them because it's easier to agree than to argue, easier to follow your plans than to propose my own." Naomi bit her lip. "I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. Just trying to make our lives better, more organized." "I know," Dexter nodded. "But sometimes I feel like we're living your life, not ours." It was the most frank conversation they'd had in years, but Dexter realized that one conversation wasn't enough. Something fundamental had changed in their relationship, and he wasn't sure if it could be fixed. "I'm going to the gym today anyway," he said, picking up his gym bag. "I need to think about it." Naomi nodded, not trying to stop him. For the first time, she looked genuinely vulnerable, and Dexter felt a prick of guilt for the game he'd started. But he also knew that without that game, they might never have faced the real problems of their marriage. As he left the house, he felt a strange mixture of sadness and release. Something was ending, but something new was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, the future seemed unpredictable, frightening, but also full of possibilities. Over the next 3 weeks, Dexter met with Rachel 4 more times. Their relationship remained strictly professional, but for Naomi, these meetings became a source of constant anxiety. She began calling him during training sessions, sending messages asking him to buy something on the way home, obvious attempts to control his whereabouts. Dexter felt their marriage was teetering on the brink. After that frank conversation, they never revisited the subject of their relationship again, as if they were afraid of what they might discover. Instead, Naomi had tried to get things back on track, planning dinners together, suggesting weekend trips, even trying to re-establish their old rituals like Sunday movie nights or Saturday breakfasts at the corner cafe. But something had changed in Dexter. The taste of freedom he felt was too sweet to give up. He continued to change his appearance, bought a few stylish shirts he'd never even considered before, started reading books he picked out himself rather than the ones Naomi recommended. Small acts of independence that had seemed insignificant before were now symbols of his awakening personality. Naomi watched these changes with growing alarm. Her attempts to regain control became more and more obvious. She began randomly stopping by the gym when Dexter was supposed to be working out there, making up urgent errands that required his presence at home on evenings when he planned to meet friends. "I don't understand why you have to go alone," she said when Dexter mentioned he was going to a soccer game with co-workers. "I could have gone with you." "It's men's company, Naomi," Dexter replied. "We'll talk about work, sports, drink beer." "And it didn't bother you before," she remarked bitterly. "You always wanted me around." "You never used to let me go to these meetings," Dexter reminded her. "There were always more important things to do." Naomi didn't argue, but her look spoke volumes. She wasn't used to having her authority questioned, especially by Dexter, who had been a model of obedience for years. Thursday night, Dexter had called to say he'd be late after work because of a sudden problem with the power grid downtown. It was true. There had been a serious accident and his crew had been called in to fix it. But Naomi reacted with poorly concealed disbelief. "And how long will that take?" she asked in a strained voice. "I don't know," Dexter answered honestly. "Maybe an hour, maybe 3. Depends on the extent of the problem." It's amazing how many accidents have started happening lately, Naomi remarked. And it's always your crew that has to be the one to fix them. Dexter felt a wave of irritation rising inside. What are you trying to say, Naomi? Nothing, she replied coldly. Just wondering if all these delays are really work-related. Do you think I'm lying to you? I don't know what to think, Dex. You've changed so much in the last month. New clothes, new friends, constant workouts with that Rachel. You've even stopped returning my calls at home. Because I'm working, Dexter said, feeling his patience wearing thin. And I don't understand why you can't trust me. I trusted you for 9 years, Naomi replied, and suddenly you're a completely different person. Maybe I'm just finally being myself, Dexter said, and without waiting for an answer, hung up the phone. He got home late, almost midnight, tired after working long hours in the rain. The house was dark, with only the kitchen light on. Naomi was sitting at the table, an empty cup of tea in front of her. She looked exhausted, as if she too had spent all evening working hard. "Hi," Dexter said, taking off his wet jacket. "You still up?" "Been waiting for you," Naomi replied without looking at him. "I called the utility company. They said the accident was fixed at 9. Dexter stiffened, feeling the anger rising inside. "You were checking up on me? And you left me a choice?" Naomi finally raised her eyes to his, and he saw a mixture of resentment and anger in them. "Where have you been, Dex? And don't tell me you've been at work." "Me and the guys stopped by the bar after our shift," Dexter answered honestly. "Had a couple beers, talked about today. Nothing special." "And you couldn't call and tell me about it?" "I didn't think I had to account for my every move," Dexter said, walking over to the refrigerator to grab a water. "It's not like you report to me." "I always tell you where I am and who I'm with," Naomi objected. "It's called respect, Dexter." "No, it's called control." Dexter slammed the refrigerator door harder than he intended. "And I'm tired of it." A heavy silence hung in the kitchen. Naomi looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. Perhaps it was the first time she saw not the obedient husband she'd molded over the years of their marriage, but a real man with his own wants and needs. "What's happening to us, Dex?" she finally asked in a quiet voice. Dexter took a deep breath. He didn't want this conversation today, not in this state, but there might not be another chance. "I think we both know what's going on," he said, sitting down across from her. "Our marriage has always been one-sided. You made the decisions, I agreed. You planned our lives, I followed the plan. And it would have gone on like that if you hadn't decided to test me with that Finley story. So now it's my fault?" Naomi crossed her arms over her chest. "No," Dexter shook his head. "It's our fault together. I let it happen. I gave up my will because it was easier. You took control because no one fought back. We both created this situation. So now what?" Naomi looked at him challengingly, but he could see the fear in her eyes. "You want a divorce? Because of me taking care of our family, planning our lives?" "I don't know what I want," Dexter answered honestly. "But I do know what I don't want. To continue living like I'm not entitled to my own opinion, to my own decisions, to my own life." They went to separate bedrooms that night. Dexter slept in the guest room. The next morning, Naomi left for work earlier than usual without waking him, without leaving the usual to-do list on the kitchen table. It was the first sign that their relationship had truly changed. They'd spent the weekend in a tense truce, avoiding serious conversations but not returning to their usual rituals either. Dexter spent most of his time in the garage, working on the old motorcycle he'd started restoring before the wedding, but abandoned at Naomi's insistence. "It's dangerous, Dex, and not practical." Naomi went about her business around the house, occasionally calling her sister, once even meeting a friend for lunch, something she'd rarely done before without a special occasion. On Monday, Dexter received a text from Rachel offering to adjust his workout program. They agreed to meet in the evening at the gym. Dexter didn't keep it from Naomi, mentioning the meeting at breakfast. "Again?" was all she said, and her voice sounded tired rather than her usual irritation. "She wants to discuss my progress and make changes to the program," Dexter explained. "It's part of the favor I paid for." Naomi nodded without arguing. "Of course it is. I was planning on working late tonight anyway." In the evening, Dexter did meet Rachel at the gym. She was impressed with his progress. His regular workouts were starting to show visible results. After class, they had protein shakes at the gym's cafe, discussing the new program. "You look stressed," Rachel remarked. "Problems at home?" "You could say that," Dexter replied evasively. "You know," Rachel said as she closed the folder with his program, "I've noticed that many of my clients don't come to the gym just for the physical changes. It's often a way to gain control over some part of their lives when other aspects seem out of control." Dexter grinned. "Sounds familiar." "Whatever happens in your life," Rachel continued, "remember that change takes time, and sometimes you have to make hard choices to move forward." Her words continued to echo in Dexter's head when he got home. Naomi hadn't arrived yet. Perhaps she'd actually stayed late at work, or maybe she was just avoiding seeing him. Opening his laptop, he began searching for information on divorces, the procedure, the paperwork required. Not that he had made a final decision, but he wanted to know what was in store for him if he decided to take that step. When Naomi finally returned, it was almost 10 o'clock. She looked tired, but at the same time more relaxed than she had been in recent days. Seeing Dexter at his laptop in the kitchen, she stopped in the doorway. "Hey," she said, "how was practice?" "Good," Dexter replied, closing the laptop. "And your day at work?" "Productive." Naomi walked to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water. "I've been thinking a lot today, Dex, about us, about what you said, and I realized you're right." Dexter raised his eyebrows in surprise. Naomi rarely acknowledged he was right, especially on important matters. "I did control things too much," she continued, sitting down across from him. "It became a habit, a way to feel safe. But I realized it was suffocating you, suffocating us." "I'm glad you realized that," Dexter said cautiously, not knowing where this conversation was leading. "I want to change, Dex." Naomi looked at him with a sincerity he rarely saw. "I want us to have a partner relationship, not what we had. I'm willing to work on that if you are too." Dexter was silent, trying to comprehend her words. Part of him wanted to believe this sudden change, but another part of him, the more cynical part, suspected it was just a new tactic to give him the illusion of freedom to eventually regain control. "I don't know, Naomi," he finally said. "It's not that simple. You can't change 9 years of a relationship overnight." "I understand," she nodded. "So I was thinking, maybe we should see a marriage and family therapist? Get some professional help?" The suggestion was unexpected. Naomi had always been skeptical of psychology, believing that any problem could be solved with the right plan and enough willpower. "Are you serious?" Dexter asked. "Absolutely," she replied. "I even found a specialist who specializes in this kind of problem. We could make an appointment next week." Dexter stared at her, trying to see if she was sincere. Perhaps Naomi really did want to change, to save their marriage. But was that possible? And most importantly, did he himself want it? Over the past month, freed from Naomi's constant control, he had begun to rediscover himself, his desires, his possibilities, and he wasn't sure he wanted to give up this newfound freedom, even for the sake of a renewed marriage. "I need to think about it," he said, getting up from the table. "This is a big decision." Naomi nodded, but he noticed her face tense. She was probably expecting immediate agreement as she usually did. "Sure, think it over. I'll wait for your decision." The next 2 days passed in a strange truce. Naomi did try to change. She didn't leave him to-do lists, didn't control his schedule, didn't even ask where he was going when he left the house. She was attentive but not intrusive, caring but not controlling. But something inside Dexter resisted this new version of their relationship. Maybe it was too late. Maybe there were too many resentments built up from years of submission, or maybe he just realized he wanted something completely different from life. A chance to start over, to be himself without having to constantly look back at other people's expectations. Thursday night, he made his decision. Friday morning, after Naomi left for work, he called a lawyer he'd found online and made an appointment. After lunch, he stopped by the law firm's office, discussed his situation, and received the preliminary divorce papers. Back at home, Dexter sat down at the kitchen table and spread the papers out in front of him. He wasn't sure if he was making the right decision, but he felt he had to take this step, if only to figure out what he really wanted. Naomi came home from work earlier than usual, as if sensing that something was going to happen today. When she saw the papers on the table, she froze in the kitchen doorway, her face pale. "What is it?" she asked, though it was obvious in her eyes that she already knew the answer. "Divorce papers," Dexter replied calmly. "I think we need to separate, Naomi." But I thought we were working on our relationship," her voice shook. "I'm trying to change, Dex." "I know," he nodded, "and I appreciate that. But this isn't just about you. It's about me, about who I've become in this relationship. And I'm not sure I can become different by staying with you." Naomi walked slowly over to the table, sinking into the chair across from him. "All because of that Finley thing? Because of that one dinner that didn't even happen?" "No," Dexter shook his head. "That was just the beginning. But when you said that dinner with another man was no big deal, it got me thinking. If things like that don't mean anything, what does anything in our relationship mean at all? What makes our marriage special if not mutual respect and trust?" "But I trust you," Naomi objected, "and I respect you." "No, you control me," Dexter said softly. "That's not the same thing, and I can't live like this anymore." Naomi stared at the papers as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You don't even want to try? 9 years, Dex. Don't they mean anything?" "They do," he sighed. "But sometimes you have to let go of the past to move on. I think we're both better off apart. You can find someone better suited to you, someone who shares your need for structure and control. And you'll find someone like Rachel?" There was bitterness in Naomi's voice. "This isn't about Rachel." Dexter shook his head. "There's nothing between us and there never was. It's about me finally starting to live my own life, to make my own decisions. And I don't want to go back to the way things were." Naomi stared at the divorce papers neatly laid out on the kitchen table. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the page, reading the dry legal language about ending the marriage due to irreconcilable differences. 9 years of life together fit into a few pages of standard text, mercilessly drawing a line under a story she thought immutable. "Is this really what you want?" she asked, raising her eyes to Dexter. In his gaze, she didn't see the usual uncertainty she could always use to sway him to her decision. A different man sat before her, determined, calm, knowing what he wanted. "Yes," he answered simply. "I think it's best for both of us." "Better?" Her voice trembled. "How can the destruction of a family be something better?" "Did we ever have a family, Naomi?" Dexter sighed. "We had routines, schedules, plans, but I don't think there's been any real intimacy, any real partnership between us for a long time." Naomi wanted to object, to say he was wrong, that their marriage had been exemplary, no fights, no financial problems, a clear division of roles and responsibilities. But the words stuck in her throat, because somewhere deep inside, she knew Dexter was right. Their relationship had long ago become a mechanical order that left no room for spontaneity, for growth, for real feelings. "And you think the solution is to just give it all up?" she finally said. "To not try to fix what can be fixed?" "I don't know if it can be fixed," Dexter answered honestly. "And it's not just about you or your control. It's about me, about who I've become in this relationship. I lost myself, Naomi. And now that I've started to find myself again, I'm not sure I can do it while staying in a marriage that has suppressed my identity for so long. But I'm ready to change. Naomi felt tears come to her eyes. I'm already changing. You can see that. I know, Dexter nodded, and I appreciate your efforts. But sometimes change isn't enough. Sometimes you just have to let go. Naomi stared at him, trying to find the words that could change things, bring back that obedient, predictable Dexter she felt safe with. But no such words existed. I'll be staying with Mark for the first while, Dexter said, getting up from the table. He's already cleared out a room for me. I'll pick up my things tomorrow when you're not home. I don't want to make this any more painful than it already is. Naomi nodded silently, not trusting her voice. She watched Dexter gather the essentials for the night, methodically putting things into a gym bag. Part of her wanted to make a scene, scream, cry, threaten do anything to keep him. But the other part, the deeper and more honest part, realized that it would just be another attempt at control, which was what had brought them to this point. The documents don't need to be signed right now, Dexter said, zipping up his bag. Read them. Consult a lawyer if you want. I propose we divide the property equally, as is proper. We can sell the house and split the money, or if you want, you can buy out my share. I don't care. You don't care? Naomi echoed. After 9 years, you don't care? Dexter stopped at the door, looking at her with sadness and something akin to regret. I do care what happens to you, Naomi. I've never wished you harm, and I don't now. But I have to finally take care of myself, and maybe you should do the same. With those words, he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Naomi sat motionless at the kitchen table, listening to the sound of his car's engine starting, and then to the silence that seemed deafening in the empty house. The first impulse was the familiar one of picking up the phone, calling him, finding a way to get him back, to restore order to her life. But instead, Naomi remained seated, letting the reality of what was happening slowly seep into her consciousness. Dexter was gone, really gone. And part of her knew he wasn't coming back, at least not on her terms. She stood up and mechanically began making tea, following the ritual she'd performed every night for the past 9 years. Boil the water, take out the cup, the white porcelain with the subtle blue ornamentation she'd chosen for Dexter because it matched their kitchen furniture. But as the water boiled, Naomi stopped, staring at the empty cup. Who is she making this tea for? For whom is she maintaining this ritual? Unexpectedly, Naomi set the teapot aside and pulled out a bottle of red wine from the cupboard that she was saving for a special occasion. "Isn't this a special occasion?" she muttered, pouring herself a glass to the brim, a gesture she would never have allowed herself before. It was irrational, unproductive, unplanned. With glass in hand, she walked to the living room and sank down on the couch, looking at the neatly arranged books on the shelves, the symmetrically placed decorative pillows, the perfectly stacked magazines on the coffee table. Everything in this house was organized, planned, controlled, and it all seemed meaningless now. Naomi took a large sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through her body. Dexter's words came to mind. It's about who I've become in this relationship. I lost myself. And who had she become? A woman whose life is so focused on control that she's lost the ability to just be, just feel. A woman who was so afraid of chaos and uncertainty that she created a sterile, predictable world around her where there was no room for real life. Her gaze fell on a framed wedding photo on the mantel. She and Dexter, young, smiling, full of hope. She remembered that day, how she'd planned every detail, how she'd made lists and schedules, how she'd overseen every aspect of the ceremony, striving for perfection. But did she remember how she felt? Was she truly happy or just satisfied that everything was going according to plan? And when had she begun to see Dexter not as a partner, but as another element to be organized, directed, controlled? When had her love turned into a need to possess, to control, to mold his life in her own image? Naomi took another sip of wine, feeling the protective walls she'd built over the years begin to crumble. The truth she had refused to see for so long was now standing before her, unvarnished and painful. She didn't love Dexter, at least not the way she should have. She loved the order he represented, the stability he provided, the role he played in her carefully planned life. And now he was gone, and her fear of losing him was not the fear of losing the man she loved, but the fear of losing control, the fear of facing the unknown, the uncertainty that had always frightened her most. The glass was empty, and Naomi rose to pour another. It was uncharacteristic of her. She had always kept her alcohol intake under strict control, limiting herself to one glass of wine on special occasions. But tonight she'd allowed herself to break her own rules, to feel the alcohol dulling the pain and sharpening her awareness at the same time. What now? She asked the empty room, sinking back onto the couch with a full glass. Her entire life was timed minute by minute, planned out weeks and months in advance. She always knew what she would do tomorrow, a week from now, a year from now. And now the future was spread out before her like a blank slate, frightening in its emptiness and at the same time tantalizing in its possibilities. For the first time in years, Naomi had no plan. For the first time, she had to decide what she really wanted, not what would be the most efficient, rational, correct in terms of conventional standards of success. Who is she without her lists, her schedules, her plans? Who is she without Dexter, without the role of the wife who controls everything? What would be left if she stripped away all the layers of control, organization, perfectionism with which she surrounded herself? Naomi closed her eyes, trying to remember what she'd been like before she became like this. Before control became her way of coping with the chaos of life. She remembered herself in college, ambitious but uninhibited, organized but capable of spontaneity. She remembered a trip with friends to the coast when they just got in the car and drove, without a plan, without reservations, letting the road lead them. She remembered that feeling of freedom, that heady sense of possibility she'd experienced then. When had she lost that? When had she started believing that the only way to be happy was to control everything and everyone around her? Maybe it started when she was a child, a single mom who could barely make ends meet, the constant fear that tomorrow there would be no money for food or that they would be evicted from their apartment. Maybe it was then that she vowed to herself that she would never live in such uncertainty, that she would create a life for herself where every detail was under control. Or maybe it came later, with the first disappointments of adulthood, with the realization that the world isn't always fair, that effort isn't always rewarded, that life has a way of ruining the most careful plans, and control had become her way of defense, her illusion of safety in an unpredictable world. But now that illusion was crumbling and Naomi was facing reality. No amount of control could protect her from pain, from loss, from change. Life will always find a way to disrupt the best-laid plans. And so she sits alone in the house she has chosen and arranged with such care, drinking the wine she allows herself only on special occasions, and realizes that all her efforts to control life have only resulted in her losing the most important thing of all, the ability to be real, the ability to love without conditions, without plans, without expectations. "I need to change," Naomi whispered into the silence. Not to get Dexter back, she was beginning to realize that their relationship wasn't what it should have been, and maybe breaking up really was the best solution. But for herself, for her future, for the possibility of someday building a relationship based on true love, not control. She finished her second glass of wine and felt a slight dizziness, an unaccustomed but not unpleasant sensation. Rising from the couch, she walked across the living room to the bookshelves where there were neatly arranged books on management, the psychology of success, time management, the literature she had studied diligently to become even more efficient, even more organized. But on the bottom shelf, almost hidden behind the more presentable tomes, were several fiction books, things she'd loved to read in her youth before she'd decided that fiction was an unproductive use of time. She pulled out one of them, a shabby edition of a favorite novel she hadn't opened in years. With the book and a bottle of wine, Naomi returned to the couch, made herself comfortable, breaking her own rule of not eating or drinking in the living room, and opened the first page. It was a small act of rebellion against her own tyranny, a small step toward a new self. Tomorrow she would wake up with a slight hangover. For the first time in a long time, she wouldn't do her morning exercise, allow herself a breakfast she usually considered too caloric. She'll call work and take the day off, something she's never done without a good reason. And then she'd sit down and write a new list, not of things to do, but things she wanted to try, places she wanted to visit, people she wanted to reconnect with. She didn't know where this path would lead her, didn't know if she would ever be free enough, open enough to build a real, healthy relationship. Didn't know if she'd ever be able to truly let go of control and let life flow. But today, in this moment, in the quiet of a home she no longer shared with anyone, with a glass of wine in one hand and a book in the other, Naomi took the first step toward meeting the real her, the one that had been hiding behind a facade of perfectionism and control all these years. And there was something frightening and exciting about it at the same time, something that made her heart beat a little faster and her lips curve into an uncertain but sincere smile. "Who are you, Naomi Prescott?" she asked herself, turning a new page not only in the book, but in her life.
Mom,